Just another minute or so, just a couple of minutes and we'll get started. So if you just joined, could you make sure you're on mute as you come in, please? Okay, I think we'll just start. So, good morning and a very warm welcome to Switch's monthly webinar, where each month we consider a particular issue or topic affecting the resource management industry in Scotland. I'm Fiona Craig, I'm the Education and Skills Manager at Zero Waste Scotland, and I'm also, very importantly, a Switch Ambassador and your host for today's webinar. So today we're going to hear from Stuart Fair from Dumfries and Galloway Council and Danielle Moore from East Renfrewshire Council, who will jointly lead us through a presentation on how we need to think about the mental health of our workforce, particularly within the resource management industry and particularly in this current pandemic and the difficult circumstances we all find ourselves in. After the presentations from Danielle and Stuart, we're going to have a question and answer session. The presentations will roughly take about 20 minutes, and after that, question and answers from you, and where we can share Danielle and Stuart's knowledge further and the issues that they've faced and how they've learned from these to put support in place for staff. But also, we're very interested to hear your experience and maybe some of the issues that you face currently. So maybe if I could just introduce Danielle and Stuart a little bit. Danielle is a manager within East Renfrewshire Council within Neighbourhood Services, and this is a multi-service operation within the Council's Environment Department, and it includes waste and recycling services among other areas. Danielle has a background and experience in HR and change management. And again, Danielle is also a Switch Ambassador and sits on the Health and Safety Working Group. Stuart Fair is currently Director Health and Safety Officer in Dumfries and Galloway Council. And the directorate includes waste services, amongst others as well. Stuart sits on the Education, Training and Competence Working Group within Switch and is too an ambassador. So if I could maybe introduce today's topic by reading a little extract from Danielle's recent blog, which is available on Switch's website, on the topic of mental health. What Danielle said within the blog was, our current world is very different to the one we knew a year ago. It's an understatement to say we're all operating in different times, and whilst we are strongly focused on service delivery and abiding by COVID-19 restrictions and guidance, we need to take a moment to think about our own and the mental health of our workforce. If we choose to ignore this or not proactively manage and support our people, it could be an accident waiting to happen. This is currently on our website, and I'll post a link in the chat so you can maybe go and have a read at that afterwards. But I just want to, first of all, open today's session by telling you a little bit about Switch itself. Just if you bear with me, for those of you that maybe have heard this before, but we're conscious that not everybody who comes to the webinars is familiar with Switch and what it's about. So in terms of Switch, it stands for Scottish Waste Industry Training, Competence, Health and Safety Forum. I'll just click on. Has that shifted to the next slide? Yes, thank you. So Switch was established 2014. And it's a multi-partnership forum across all sectors, but its focus is the resource management industry. And it's people working together across the industry to provide leadership and work together jointly to raise standards in health and safety, and also to create more of a learning development culture within the industry, and actually to try and make it an attractive career choice for people, as we have an ageing demographic. And we need to attract people into the industry, particularly in today's current policy climate in relation to climate change and so on. So not going to read out these stats, some of you have seen them before. The reason why we set up Switch is to basically improve health and safety and learning development so that these statistics will perhaps improve. The statistics aren't good. Our record on health and safety is very, very poor. And waste management is second highest, worst industry for injuries, for fatalities, exceeded only by the agriculture, forestry and fishing industry. And despite the fact it's a small industry, that's not a good record. In terms of injuries and fatal fatalities, then these are some of the stats from 2018, 2019. And again, some of you have seen these, and this needs to change. Our approach in Switch is to work together to basically share ideas, promote good practice, maybe identify what are the issues we need to be tackling. And today is one aspect of that in terms of thinking about mental health. We have a website, we have news and events on the website, we've got a Twitter account, we've got LinkedIn, so please feel free to join in those forums on social media. And I'm going to hand over to Stuart in 2 ticks, but just before we do, could you make sure, in terms of our kind of meeting rules this morning, and to make things easier, could you make sure you're on mute at the moment, and you can control mute on and off on your device, but if you could keep it on mute, then the plan is to post questions into the chat, and I will forward those questions to Danielle and Stuart afterwards. Just to note, we are recording, so if you don't want to be seen on camera, please just switch off your video. And this is so that we can share this on our website after the event has happened, for those that can't actually make it. We had a bit of competition this morning for a ROSPA event, and I know some people are off to that and would like to see this one as well. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Stuart. Stuart's going to share his screen, and we can get going on the actual topic for today. Stuart. Stuart, you're on mute. If you can maybe unmute, I think.
Okay, welcome everybody. Hopefully you can all see these slides. Welcome everyone to this Switch webinar on mental health and wellbeing. Just when I was sitting watching everybody coming in, I've discovered it's probably not very good for my mental health and wellbeing this morning. Mental health and wellbeing is a huge topic, and this is only going to scratch the surface, but hopefully I'll give you at least a bit of an understanding of the subject. In the first part of the presentation, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the topic before handing over to Danielle, who will relate it to the current COVID pandemic and how it's all affecting us. change the slide. Does that change the slide?
Stuart, have you clicked to share your slides up at the top?
I have indeed. And it was showing that it was sharing them.
Maybe just try unclicking it, Stuart, and share it again.
There we go. That's it now, Stuart. You're fine.
That's back.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's fine. And that's on. Right, that's us now back on track. I told you this wasn't good for my mental health. This first slide just gives you probably the most commonly used definition of mental health and wellbeing, and it's from the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization recognises that mental health and wellbeing is it's not just about feeling well within yourself, but it's a feeling of being fulfilled and enriched, and actually able to contribute to society. This is another definition from a report in 2004 done for the World Health Organization, entitled Mental Health, Resilience and Inequalities by Dr. Lynn Friedley. The report looked at the impact mental health had on a number of different outcomes for individuals, and how the number of different outcomes for individuals and communities, including healthier lifestyles, better physical health, improved recovery from illness, fewer limitations on daily living, higher educational attainment, increased productivity, employment and earnings, better relationships, and more social cohesion and engagement. The report concluded that all these outcomes were not only greatly enhanced by the absence of mental illness, but also the presence of positive mental health. Most people value a sense of emotional and social well-being. Good mental health affects our capacity to learn, to communicate, to sustain relationships, and to cope with change. This is called the mental health continuum. It's a visual way of helping us to understand it better. And if it makes it easier for you to understand, you can substitute mental health for any physical illness, for example, diabetes or asthma or any other illness. Vertical axis represents mental health and well-being, and the horizontal axis, mental illness. So in the top right, this is a good place to be, and this is where you really want to be. Normally when we're in this quadrant, life's good and everything's going well. The bottom right can be caused by situations arising that cause stress, such as bereavement, redundancy, financial problems, divorce, etc., etc. The top left is where someone has a mental illness. Again, if you can think of asthma, it's still possible to feel good about your life and contribute, but you may require medication in order to assist you to do so. And the bottom left is where this mental illness goes uncontrolled or undiagnosed, and perhaps the person in this quadrant is using alcohol or drugs as a coping strategy. These strategies may be the same as the bottom right. It's important to know that we're all in the continuum somewhere at any given time, and it's also good to be able to recognise where we are within the continuum. Just before I put up the next slide, I'd just like to take a couple of minutes just to either write down or just to think about them, words that you would associate with mental health. I'm not going to ask you to share them, so you can be as un-PC as you want. Okay, As the mental health continuum showed, mental health can be positive as well as negative. We all have mental health and it can fluctuate over time, but yet we often refer to mental health in negative words or phrases. I'm sure if I was ask you to write down to tell me all the words and phrases that you've wrote down or thought of, your list would contain more negative words than positive ones. Mental health continuum, along with other research, is often used to identify underlying causes of poor mental health and daily functions, gather information about the different mental health states a person is in over time, indicate when it may be necessary to seek professional help, recognise symptoms of certain disorders when mental health becomes mental illness, identify particular sources of stress, encourage employees to think about mental health and how to gain support, and to maintain a positive mindset, understand how to identify mental health, illness symptoms in others, and how to deal with crisis situations without affecting our well-being. Understanding the basic symptoms and common conditions can help us to identify it in others and allow appropriate paths of help to be discussed and signposted with them. So firstly, we've got depression. Symptoms can include a prolonged depressed mood, loss of confidence and self-esteem, poor concentration, and thoughts of suicide. In this case, someone that's famous, Angelina Jolie, the famous actress, who has publicly stated that she suffers from depression. Anxiety disorder. Symptoms can include poor concentration, headaches, irritability, your mind racing or going blank, panic attacks, or OCD. In this case, David Beckham has come out publicly and said he suffers from this. Bipolar disorder, talking quickly, loss of energy, and difficulty concentrating. Famous person this time is Stephen Fry, who suffers from bipolar disorder. And finally, schizophrenia. Common symptoms are hearing and seeing things others don't, in other words, hallucinations. A feeling that everything is wonderful and important, or conversely frightening and strange. And in this case, Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys has come out publicly and said he suffers from schizophrenia. I think the key message from this slide is to try and re-emphasise what I mentioned earlier, that just because work colleagues may suffer from one of these disorders, it doesn't mean that they can't be successful and contribute to the team or workplace. When researching for today, I found this slide surprised me slightly. The information is probably slightly out of date, but I still believe relevant to today. Mental health has a huge impact on individuals and society. Often people can hide it or mask the issues they're facing, and it's often difficult to spot in others. Mental health not only affects the individual, but can affect the business and the wider society as well. According to the CIPD, almost 1 in 3 people have experienced mental health issues while in employment. And referring back to the continuum on the previous slide, not all of them will be off work. Many will be at work, but have coping strategies in place or medication. Again, it doesn't mean that they're unable to do their job, but they may need additional support. The World Health Organization predicts that depression will be the world's most common illness by 2030. Being in employment is generally considered to be a good thing. It's more than just about earning money. It provides an identity, an opportunity to make friends, provides a structure and a feeling of contribution. In a 2017 report for the Mental Health Foundation, 85% of people out of work have experienced mental health problems, compared to the 2/3 of people in employment and just over 1/3 of those who are retired. As managers within organisations have the legal and moral duty underpinned by health and safety law to keep workplaces mentally healthy for employees. The role is to try and encourage, motivate and support each team member. The practice of providing support at an early stage can prevent escalation of a condition and potential absence from work. Communicate clearly and effectively. Provide a healthy physical environment. Provide regular support and supervision. Staff will feel supported and valued, resulting in a healthier, more motivated and productive workforce. Give clear direction, ensuring employees are clear on their roles and how it fits in with the business. The last two slides I have are just quotes from famous people, which I hope will go further and make you either smile or think about mental health in a different way. The first one, as you can see, is from Ruby Wax. And then we have quotes from Charlie Chaplin and Robin Williams. So I say this is a wide-ranging topic, but hopefully it's kind of scratched the surface and showed that mental health is not just negative, as many people assume, but can be positive and negative, and that everybody has mental health. And depending on what kind of day they're having or what kind of month they're having, will depend on whether it's good, positive mental health or negative mental health. If I now pass over to Danielle, who will relate this to the current pandemic.
Stuart, excuse me, Stuart, if you could stop sharing, there we go, that's it. Danielle, there you go.
Morning everyone, if you can just bear with me just to upload this presentation.
We can see that now, Danielle.
Yeah, that's fine, thanks. Does that look okay on the screen? Okay, morning everybody. Thanks very much for taking some time out today to come along and listen to the presentation. I know Fiona's already introduced me. I'm Danielle Moore from East Renfrewshire Council. And before I kind of start to talk through the presentation in detail, I just would like you to take another wee moment just to focus on the words on the slide above, which really do form the basis of the presentation. Fiona's already outlined the fact that I was asked probably around about last summer by Jim, who's also key to Switch, to write a blog in support of mental health and wellbeing in the waste management sector, and obviously from that has then kind of spiralled interest in trying to learn more about the situation and what we can do to support our teams. The quote is designed to thought-provoke, if anything else, and what I would say is that's the basis of the presentation today. So why are we interested in mental health and wellbeing in the waste management sector, and why is it so relevant at this point in time? Well, we're all aware of the pandemic, we can't escape it, and along with it being the right thing to do to support your teams in the work environment, There's a number of reasons why we would want to invest and support our workforce. So Stuart had talked about the CIPD, which is the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, and they do regular surveys on the top reason for absence. And year on year, there is a trend where mental health continues to be the top reason for absence in the majority of the organisations. And that spans across both the private and the public sector. Our waste management services prevent public health issues fundamentally, so we need our teams to be fit and well to deliver services both in a public sense and a commercial sense. And as Fiona already outlined at the beginning of the session, we are a well-established high-risk sector for accidents and incidents. What I've kind of come to discuss through the Switch group over the last year or so is the fact that there doesn't appear to be a direct correlation and in a lot of investigation between the statistics that are produced for accidents and incidents and the reality of mental health and deteriorations in mental health and wellbeing in the sector. I have no doubt personally that links will exist. We deal with large groups of male personnel day to day within the sector, and traditionally these groups are unlikely to seek support proactively for mental health and wellbeing issues. But we all know from recent times and reports in the news that obviously they can be particularly vulnerable to mental health and in particular suicide. Obviously we want to retain and keep our workforce in strong good health, and we have key skill shortages within the sector areas, for example our drivers. So that combined with the fact that we don't want an accident on the road, we need to make sure that we invest in the mental health of all our workforce, including our drivers, because they do a high risk role for us day to day. There's issues around the impact of COVID-19 and contact, which again doesn't do well to support mental health. The creation of bubbles within our kind of day-to-day running of operations has meant that contact has become more limited, not only between peers within the working environment, but also between employees and managers themselves. And that can create disconnect and all sorts of issues. Our lack of ability to deploy our crews in the way that we might have wanted to in the past on the ground has resulted in slower and restricted services in some areas. This has put pressure on those in charge of our delivery, our supervisory teams, for example, and again can contribute towards feelings of poor mental health. So all of these things combined with our kind of legal obligations, I know Stuart had mentioned the HSE requirements and our legal requirements to support our staff, make it important and develop a really strong business case as to why we should be looking at mental health within the waste sector and why we should be taking proactive steps to manage and challenge any issues arising. So before I move on, it's a bit of a kind of, as I said at the beginning, a kind of thought-provoking session. So again, not asking you to kind of come on camera or to comment, but some difficult questions to maybe think about yourself. How is your own mental health right now? How are you feeling? What do you know directly about your own team's mental health and wellbeing? Do you really know how people are doing in your own teams? Do you feel equipped and able to support others with their wellbeing? Maybe that's because you're not in a great place yourself. Do you know how to access support and resources? When was the last time you touched base with your team in a meaningful and personal way? You tend to have a Teams meeting with them and it's pretty much all business chat and little room for personal chat. Because when you're not face to face with people, if you're working in remote environments and you're maybe working from home and you don't have the contact on the ground, these things can quite easily happen. And do you feel you're too remotely distant to know? So the next part of the presentation just involves a bit of reflection on the impact to mental health, the key groups of staff that we have within the waste sector. I've identified 3 groups, our frontline teams, our supervisory teams and our management teams. And what I would say is in all these groups, there's areas of commonality in terms of fears, concerns, stressors, things that can contribute to poor mental health. Across all groups, there will be concerns about future, income, jobs, their families, maybe through people suffering ill health within their family, whether that be through COVID or whether that be because they maybe suffer with another, health condition that they can't access or the treatment that they would want at this point in time. People have faced redundancy, furlough, different earnings levels coming into households. So that would affect all the groups identified. I think we have to recognise that because we are restricted in how we can deploy staff and manage people on the ground, we've got a strong focus on the day-to-day, but that has curtailed access to things like development opportunities for people. We can't all just get together and go on a course anymore. A lot of things have been driven online, and for parts of the sector area, some of that is not appropriate. And for some of our sector, not everybody is digitally capable as well. People are tired. I think we have to recognise that across all groups. I think we thought this might have kind of died down after a few months, but obviously the longer this runs, the less time people have had out, in particular when you're running frontline essential services. People haven't taken the full complement of holidays last year because they've had to keep going because maybe there's been a reduction in personnel through shielding staff, and people are starting to suffer with tiredness and fatigue. And change, change has been constant, I think, for all of us. Lots to get our head round in terms of how we are operating, ever-changing government guidance for people to pick up and digest. So again, that creates a pressure in terms of how we're managing and operating. But I would say one positive coming out of change has definitely been the fact that people have had to deal with change in a quicker way, which is not necessarily always a negative. In terms of our frontline teams itself, their particular pressures relate to the fact that they have really had to front face and deal with change. They've had to deal with members of the public, for example, out in the front line. There is a sense of feeling, I think, from times that because a lot of the management personnel have had to homework, that management teams are not available to them, they're not accessible to them, that they've pretty much been left on the ground. And, a feeling at times that they're worried about their health, they're vulnerable, they're being exposed, being out on the front line. So I would say those things are particular to that grouping. In terms of our supervisory teams, obviously I won't cover everything in terms of the generic stuff, but in terms of impact, what they've had to kind of front face and deal with staff themselves. They've had to deal with concerns, they've had to ensure that our services are running. That's been really challenging for this particular group because at times they don't have all the answers to everything. They do have to deal with employees who are worried, concerned, and at the same time, in particular, if you're running with essential services, these services have to run. So our supervisors are in a particularly challenging position. In terms of our managers, they're not on the ground perhaps as much as what they might want to in order to support our staff and teams in relation to change. Again, they don't have all the answers to everything, but they can be heavily criticised for that. They are concerned about running businesses and making sure that they can continue to income generate, and at the same time, they've had to fundamentally change aspects of the operation and make sure it's safe for people. And again, they can feel isolated as they're not on the ground day to day. So I suppose the message from this particular aspect of the presentation is there is a lot of pressure on all of us as a result of the pandemic and the scale and the pace of change. Some aspects are different to others, but I think fundamentally we have to learn to think and be mindful of all the different groups that we have, and be a bit understanding as to what the different pressures are. And that's what that particular piece of the presentation is designed to do. And whilst there's a lot of focus on the front line, we can't ignore the impact to those that are home working. And although I've identified three key groups, there's obviously your home workers to the side of that, and that could be your support service teams. Equally, it could be some of your managers as well. So I've kind of question marked whether or not your people working from home are the forgotten workforce. And some people do love working from home, and I think we have to recognise that. And people that have maybe had, long commutes to business don't have that pressure anymore, and they feel that they're more effective. But there are also people that are feeling isolated. They feel that they've lost the camaraderie, their team round about them, the day-to-day chat. There is a concern that there is no boundary between work life and home life. And that creativity that can be generated by working amongst colleagues has been lost to an extent through kind of digital interactions, although I think there's ways that you can work around that as well. And ultimately, from time to time, I'm sure we all have frustrations with remote working and access and things maybe not running as effectively as what we might want it to. So there is a pressure on home workers within our sector area. And again, it's just important to recognise that. Over the summer, I was involved in a course and a piece of research where we sought to kind of speak to people and find out what the impact of home working was directly to them. And that was quite fundamental in the sense of the realisation that not that long into the pandemic, 3-4 months, there was a lot of issues coming out in terms of how people felt. Not only physical space issues, as I've kind of highlighted on the slide, people have kind of bought property and set up their home not with the view of having to then decamp and necessarily have a specific office space. And, if you've got kids at home, you'll know that that's not that easy to do, depending on your own financial situation and your setup. The technology issues and frustrations, and several members of the family potentially living and working all in the same space area, with really nowhere else to go. There was somebody who had 5 members of their family working around a dining table, which is extremely challenging. And again, that kind of what was coming through was that lack of manager contact face to face. On a personal level, I would say is something that came through that research. So again, a bit of food for thought, and just a nod to the fact that whilst we are obviously very focused on the front line, we can't forget about those that are also home working. So I suppose what I'm saying all these groups have in common is uncertainty, and whilst nothing in life is certain, as the saying goes, I think all of us can recognise that the scale and the pace of change generated through the COVID-19 pandemic has been unprecedented, and it really does affect people significantly within every single household. And as a result of this, it makes it very hard for people to plan for the future. And that creates a situation that can significantly impact mental health and wellbeing. Not only within their own household, but also then spans into the working environment as well. So how can we pick this up, and what can we do to support our people and make things more stable and certain for them? I think as teams, we have to try and make things as sure as possible, and that is really difficult and challenging in an ever-moving situation. What I think we need to be first and foremost is honest with our teams. I think we need to acknowledge the reality of the situation and the fact that it is probably quite normal for people to be uncertain at this time. In particular, I would say in the month of January, which is normally can be a bit of a doom and gloom month for a lot of people anyway, after the highs and lows of Christmas and New Year periods. But I think I know from my own perspective, certainly working where I do, that I think, this is a particularly hard month for people. So I think we have to be kind and acknowledge that and not dismiss people in that respect. I think we have to think about how we communicate with our teams and to think about the different approaches that we need to apply to that. Kind of gone are the days, in particular with our frontline staff, of kind of gathering people en masse in a room for a briefing or a toolbox talk. We need to think about how we disseminate information so we still inform and keep people in touch with what's happening. Difficult at this point because of the restrictions, but as I said, this presentation was prepared prior to the current Tier 4, but where we can have visibility and presence from a management level down, to support our frontline teams, to show them that we are still there for them and to answer questions, and that might be all it takes, is just to have somebody in front of you to be able to talk to alleviate concerns. But with this current stay-at-home guidance just now, I know that that is not easy. So I would say if we can support our supervisory teams, who tend to still be on the ground, to then have that frontline support capability, then that would be ideal at the moment. I think if we have established and clear business impact assessment plans for how we intend to run the service, if we are kind of tailing off and re-establishing and recovering, that we're clear on those plans, that our supervisory teams are clear on those plans, that our managers are clear on those plans, and that they can tailor and communicate information to our teams appropriately so people know what's happening and why. I think we need to actively manage the disconnect which has been created. Saw something pop up on the chat there about that kind of them and us around the home working team and, you know, your teams that are on the front line. I agree with that. I think when I wrote the blog last year, there was a significant number of people shielding, and I think again that also created a them and us situation. People concerned that they were still having to go out and work day to day. There was reductions in staff numbers, and they were still having to front it. And I think, you know, there's lots of different circumstances that create them and us, and I think these have to be talked about and understood, and way forwards agreed and understanding created into people's different circumstances. Obviously, one of my key recommendations is to establish a strong wellbeing strategy if your organisation doesn't have it, with a focus on mental health, and utilise as much as possible your HR teams and your trade unions if you have unions in your environment. They are obviously particularly supportive of mental health and wellbeing. And with that wellbeing strategy, an employee assistance programme can be an invaluable investment for your organisation in terms of giving access to independent counselling and support. And again, at this time, you know, advice on financial assistance support for families that are maybe struggling. You know, people with kids at home just now that maybe would have got access to free school meals and things in the past. And, you know, I know councils in particular would be good at trying to pick up the void in that respect, but families are struggling. So independent support that takes the issue out with your organisation, that people feel they can go to in confidence and have discussions, is without a doubt invaluable. And using data to drive decisions. I was involved in a conversation with somebody who wanted to survey their whole workforce to ask them how they were doing at this point in time. And my initial response to that was, what will you do if you don't like the results? And what do you do if those results come back to say it's awful and actually you don't have the means to do much about it at this point in time because it's so challenging? So I think it's important to talk to teams, and I do think it's important to get information out to help improve. But I also think you have to do that with a view to managing expectations. And I think if people say that they don't want to go out to work because they're concerned, and that's something that you can't support in terms of that being an option, I just think you have to be mindful about how you're interacting with your teams to support them, but at the same time be also realistic about the job that people have to do. So I think we need to get teams involved. I think we need to manage their expectations in doing so, because we all have a job to do and it is essential. I think you have to forward plan and manage it as best you can, and that is difficult when things are changing daily, weekly at times. I also think you have to think about the wider safety issue in the work environment. I think COVID has dominated so much. And I think what we don't want is to let the other side of safety and risk slip within the work environment. So certainly, you know, your risk assessments that you would normally have been reviewing, disseminating, reminding staff of, all of that still needs to be picked up and taken out to your workforce, perhaps in different ways in terms of how you might have communicated before, but it's really important that we still do that. And as I said, I think it's really important to try and be as proactive as you possibly can in these times, to engage with your teams, to understand how they're feeling and to get them the support that they need. But that is pretty much the presentation from me today. I've signalled and signposted some additional further sources of support and information, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end of the presentation today.
Danielle, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very, very much for that. And also, Stuart and Danielle's presentations have really covered a lot of ground here. Stuart has kind of highlighted the scale of the problem, and Danielle has given us some very good, I think, ideas around strategies for helping us to deal with this in relation particularly to the current situation. So if you do have any questions, could you please, and there's quite a few questions now being posted, I'm not sure if we're going to get through all of these in the next 15 minutes. But I think latterly Danielle's strategies of the things we can do at the end there is really, really good in terms of the things that we can do. And what we'll do is we will, that list of resources at the end there that you had in your presentation, we might actually be able to post that up on our website as well following this seminar. So it's obviously a major issue in society, as Stuart's highlighted, but it's actually what kind of things as managers and as colleagues can we do? And one of the very first questions that was raised was, how can you create an environment for managers and others to recognise and provide a safe and respectful place for people to bring forward issues related to mental health, to get that support, talk about issues and so on? I think it's a good question, Danielle, maybe if I could ask you first, because working remotely makes that, I think, even more difficult. And, you know, I know you've covered a lot of ground about being proactive, but that first step is obviously the most difficult one sometimes. How do we do that? What can we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the basis of, you know, creating an environment will be to kind of lead by example. Ultimately, you know, you need your senior people to kind of be leading and supporting and being willing to engage, and I suppose recognise the impact of mental health into the work environment. And I suppose, you know, the kind of one of the first slides I put up, if that doesn't kind of sell the business case alone, you know, in terms of cost, impact, you know, potential for accidents, you know, so even if nothing else, from a financial sense as well as a moral sense, you would hope that people would recognise it's the right thing to do and to lead by example in that respect. I would then say, kind of following on from that, is your structure and your strategy in relation to your kind of your wellbeing environment, your HR support, as I said, your employee assistance support. So you have to do a bit of work to create an environment. I suppose it doesn't just happen by itself, and you know, very much trying to encourage people to come forward. I know that obviously the majority of us are home working. And if we had been in the office, we might have had something like an open door policy environment. And then I think it's important that in a digital sense, if we're talking about home working in particular just now, that we still have the ability to create some kind of open door access to our managers and to our staff. And as I said, it's not purely just for online because we've got a meeting and we need to deal with a particular work issue. Some of the stuff that I deal with, you can do, team bonding things, you can do other things within your organisation. Some of the research I was involved in, people were talking about setting up things like book clubs and, areas of interest and cross networking groups across their own organisation for particular things that people were interested in. And then obviously from that, taking things forward maybe as restrictions ease, things like walking groups and different things. So people are being quite creative, I would say, where it's been encouraged. So probably an encouragement of creativity. But again, I think with your manual staff, signposting, making people aware, being a listening ear, and I suppose being understanding where if you know somebody particularly well and they're coming in and they're acting out of character, that your teams, your frontline supervisory teams in particular, are supported enough to know that there's issues there and to deal with that in the best way that they can. And that could take, depending on the situation, that can take many different avenues. Anything from, just a chat, to actually realising that you maybe have to get somebody more intervention, support and assistance.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Building on that point, maybe I'll ask you first, Danielle, and then we'll come to Stuart, is resources. Good resources seems to be an issue that's been raised in a variety of forums in terms of the questions that have been posted. So we need good resources as managers and as colleagues, I think, and training perhaps, and how to speak to someone about their mental health issues. We need more tools, we need to know how best to support people, and as Stuart highlighted earlier, there's various forms of mental health and issues that, we're not experts. So how can we, deal with these things when we're not? And you've highlighted some resources, but, do you think we need better tools to support people and their families ultimately as well?
Fiona, sorry, do you want me to take this one? Or
if you could, and then I was going to go to Stuart, if that's
right. I mean, there is, as we've kind of already said, a wide variety of things that people can go to access, everything from kind of online guides, which, Mind's a particularly good website to kind of give background in relation to mental health. You can get courses on mental health first aid. As I said, resource for me is making sure that as organisations you have a sound, strategy for dealing with mental health and wellbeing. And I think, as I said, the fact if you can provide an external counselling support services to your staff, that really does go some way to give access and support. If somebody is suffering with stress, HSE has a whole load of information and guidance, and in particular for things like work-related pressure and stress, their risk assessment process can be a really good tool to give to staff to allow that as a basis for discussion to try and pull out the sources of stress and anxiety or depression that they might have, or just the fact that they're feeling low because of the circumstances. But again, it's what are you doing with that information, and how much can you address and support that's within your organisation's control. So there's a wee bit, this is what I'm saying, there's a wee bit of managing expectations. And what I would say is I do think we put a lot on our supervisor teams, our frontline teams to support people, but they aren't trained counsellors. And I'm very mindful of that. So I think it's therefore really important if you can signpost and you've got a structure in place within your organisation to help support them as well as everybody else.
Thanks very much. Stuart, just coming to you again, do you have anything that maybe you could add in terms of where do we find the right resources and training, given we're not experts?
I think most of my advice would probably go down the same line as Danielle's. Also, if you're a kind of larger business or a local authority, then finding a good occupational health provider can be quite good to assist you. It's a good referral point, because I think, as Danielle said, it's important that people who are trained within your organisation to cope with mental health are not the be all and end all, but are seen as guides or being able to signpost people to professionals for help. And they're not just these people are not just left to deal with it all on their own, or it starts to affect their mental health as well, and it becomes negative. So I think that's probably the two main points is that they're just signposting to other places, and if we can get an occupational health provider. Also, there's lots of mental health first aider courses out there, which are really good as well, and can provide support.
Okay, so there's quite a good question here I thought I'd ask both of you, maybe starting with you, Stuart, is from Jim. How can we encourage a reluctant employer to embed a proper wellbeing strategy into the workplace for themselves and for their employees? I mean, obviously you think about this, your employers are thinking about this, but there are employers out there that perhaps aren't doing as much as they could. Stuart, if for those of us here who maybe are in this situation, how do you think we can encourage those reluctant employers to get on board with this in terms of wellbeing strategies?
I think the main one is going back to Danielle's first slide as well, is highlight the financial cost. It's easy enough with most organisations nowadays to find out the number of absences, why a person's been absent. So presenting this to the employer, will highlight what's happening within the organisation with regard to mental health. But I think probably the biggest one is the financial cost of having your staff, being absent from work for particularly longer periods of time. Sometimes with a physical illness, it's only 2 or 3 days, but with mental illness, it can sometimes, or mental health issues, it can sometimes be run into months that you're losing a member of staff, which then has the implication of bringing in, perhaps agency staff or somebody backfilling the job. So all these are probably compelling issues, you can take to your employer.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Danielle, very quickly, I think we've got a minute or two left. Anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with everything that Stuart says. I think, other than the kind of, if you can't sell it on a moral basis, I think, the financial cost would hit home. I would also say from a kind of attractiveness from an employer perspective, if you're seen to be a good employer and you're seen to be supportive of your teams, regardless of, what happens to them along that kind of employment journey, then that can go some way to attracting and retaining the best talent. Okay,
thank you very much, Danielle. We're going to quickly run out of time, so I think we're going to have to stop, and I'm sorry we didn't get through all those really good questions that you've posted, but this isn't the end of the story. Switch is actively looking at this as an issue, and I see ESA has recently started a working group to develop guidance and resource on mental health in relation to health and safety strategies. So we'll look out for that coming through Switch in terms of further information on that. There's also an offer to join a LinkedIn group, etc. Switch is also going to be delivering in partnership with Scottish Union Learn some training on mental health and how to I suppose cope with some of the issues that might be presented to you as a manager and as a colleague. What to do is look on Switch's website for, if you're not a member, join. Look on there for further news and events, and also further information about how we're going to take forward this topic, which seems to have grabbed everyone's interest. Our next webinar rather than seminar is on the 25th of February. We do them every Thursday, last Thursday of every month rather, and it's at 10 o'clock, so it's kind of time to switch on. Can I just thank our speakers so much? They put in so much effort there. They were excellent and I think it's really, really helped us to understand what this issue is. And thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you at the next one in February. Take care and thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Fiona, is there anything else you need from me before I head off?
No, maybe if you tweet your slides, or maybe just send me your slides, because although this is recorded, we can also, I think, you know, for example, the resources and the slides, a few people have asked for the slides, Danielle, so
Okay, no
if
problem.
you and Stuart are okay. That
Yeah.
I think seemed to go really well. Everybody's more or less exited. Yeah.
Well done, Danielle.
Thank you.
It's really good.
It was just as well I wasn't helping out, because I was cut off for about 10 minutes.
I know, because I saw you disappear and I thought, oh no, is he get fed up with this?
Well, I've been texting you. I've been texting you as in the background. What we need to remember to do is see if you pin. I pinned the three of you, so Stuart, Fiona, and yourself, and then that was the people that people saw.
Right.
I only did that right. I was only the last 10 minutes.
How did you do that? Because I was looking through